Well, it's good to be back. I hope you were able to watch the last post. In that post, I tried to orient anybody that might have the interest to watch in on these. What my thinking was when I decided to start this YouTube channel venture, I had thought about it for lots of years and I've prayed about it. And like I said in my video last time, I kind of set a goal for myself on my 75th birthday to get this thing kicked off. And I hope I don't kick it right off the table to begin with. But anyway, it's been kind of fun to think about some of the things that we'll discuss. I've been at the dentist's office for 2 different appointments today, and kind of a follow-up to one I had not too long ago to have one of my teeth pulled. So that comes with being 75 years old too, is you start losing your teeth and you can't decide whether or not you're going to be around long enough to afford to put one back in or not, to replace the one that got taken out. And anyway, it's a good life. And tonight, I thought I'd kind of follow up a little bit about the last post, because I mentioned Henry David Thoreau as one of the people that I've kind of respected in that he was an independent thinker and liked to figure things out. And I was, I guess, cut out of some of that same cloth, because like I said last time, I've always been inquisitive. Just a little background on Thoreau. He was a contemporary with Ralph Waldo Emerson. They even lived in the same village. And they were part of, along with some other people, they were part of what they called the Transcendentalists, the Transcendental movement. And a lot of people don't know what that means. I wouldn't if I hadn't looked it up, and in fact taught it for quite a period of my life in my teaching career. But transcendental means that we have, I guess it's a philosophy is the way I would define it. It's a philosophy in which you acknowledge that you and everyone else has the ability to know what truth is intuitively. You don't have to have somebody spoon feed it to you even. In fact, that those that came out of that transcendental period, they were led kind of by Emerson, and he wrote I guess you'd call it a handbook for that movement. It's just an essay called Nature. And I mentioned last time some of the things that I observed in nature and how it built me, made me who I am, I think, a lot today, because I was out in nature on the farm at a young age and was inquisitive and observing and just learning. And anyway, the Transcendentalists believe that you could learn a lot by just paying attention to nature. And through the years, I've come to realize that that's true. There are some things that apply to the trees and the birds and the rivers and the mountains and the heavens that apply to us too. And we can learn, if we want to call them, maybe at this point, we'll call them patterns. I've come to think that there may be more laws, and they apply to nature, but they apply to us as well. And I will get into the nitty-gritty of that and explain different situations where I've come to understand that. But that's been part of this trip I've been on all through these years, to try to figure out how things work. and really build a foundation, as I mentioned last time with Thoreau's statement about digging and working and wedging our feet downward through the mush and sludge of opinion, through philosophy and religion until we could find rocks and bottom. That's not the exact quote, and then once we knew it was there and we could rely on it, that we started to lay a foundation. Well, some of the laws that govern nature, I think, are that rock bottom. And you don't come to understand them unless you pay attention to them. We spend too much time we have this term called lollygagging. We lollygag through life, and it just passes us by without us really thinking about who we are and how we're going to live each day and what we should do and what we're here for. And I don't think that's an uncommon thought, but it needs to be pursued. It needs to be delved into, and it needs to be an earnest desire to understand it and know it, feel comfortable with it. I'm reminded of a story of a little boy and I was taught this in some class when I was a kid. I would have been way young because I don't remember much else, but I remember this story. And apparently this man had fallen in a hole, some sort of an abandoned mine of some sort, and he was down in the hole. And the entrance to the hole was such that only a little boy could get down there. And there was a little boy in the crowd, and they needed him to take something down to the man. I can't remember whether it was a medicine or a rope or something, but they needed him to take something down, and they wanted to lower him down on a rope and get him down there through this hole to help this guy out that had been trapped down there through a fall. And I remember the story was that what touched me is that the little boy wouldn't do it. He said, no. He says, the only way I'll do it is if you let my dad hold the rope. And I've always remembered that story. And because it shows the importance of trust. You have to, in order to act, in order to buy into anything, in order to engage, I guess is the word, you have to be able to trust. Well, what do you trust in? You trust in what you believe. And what you believe better be based upon that rock bottom stuff that's true, because otherwise slides right up from under you. And I could tell you I will tell you stories as we get along through this that have kind of helped me realize some of the things I've learned through the years. Anyway, it's good to be here, and it's good to talk to you a little about transcendentalism and the innate power to know truth intuitively. And I've often thought about that. We watch on TV, even these days, we watch wildlife shows, and we'll see maybe it's turtles hatching out on a beach. And they know that something inside them tells them exactly what direction to run and to run fast. And what is that? What is it that tells them that? How do they learn it? What communication do they receive, and where does it come from, and that motivates them to do exactly the right thing at exactly the right time? I saw it on the farm with calves. I mentioned calves that have been born to some of the dairy cows, and when they were just born, they knew first of all, the cow knew enough to lick the calf and get the membranes off its nose so it could breathe, or it'd die right there. Well, how'd that cow know that? How'd that cow know what to do, where to lick, and how long? And then that little wobbly calf, when it gets up, how does it know what to do, which end of the cow to run to for food? And those of us that grew up on a dairy farm found out, or came to realize, that it was actually impressed upon us as we took care of the calves, how important that first feeding out of the cow was to that calf, because it's the milk is what they call colostrum, and it had some ingredients and some nutrition in it that was critical to that little baby calf when it was needing something so bad, and it knew exactly where to go. And just things like that just kind of boggle my mind. I mean, if you think about it, it's pretty profound. And so you think, well, so do those kind of things apply to me? I mean, do I have that innate power, that innate instinct, I guess is the right word, that innate instinct from deep inside me that tells me what truth is and how to act on it once I receive it? And you ask yourself that question and you think, well, yeah, maybe I do. Well, the Transcendentalists, Emerson, Thoreau, and others that joined in with them, believed it, and there's it's fun to read about them because they were intent on observing. The stories about Thoreau, people would see him looking under the leaves by like a pond when they were going to work, and when they came home from work, he was still looking under the same leaves, just trying to figure out what he could learn there. And in this book that he wrote called Walden, and he didn't write very much, but he wrote what he had to say was profound. Anyway, he spent all one day trying to figure out what was under those leaves, and came to find out that there were two different kinds of ants. There were black ants and there were red ants. And there was a war going on. They were engaged in battle all day long. He was observing the battle and taking mental notes and seeing if he couldn't learn something from it all. Well, that's the kind of thing that we don't do enough of. I didn't do enough of it, even though I'd heard about some of this way early, until I got closer to my retirement years and got some of this, I called it chaff, off the table. Then I started paying attention to things a little bit and saying, hold on, I haven't thought some of this through. I need to figure it out. And so I don't know who all listen to these, but if you're in a frame of mind that you wonder about some of those same things, just on a very root level, follow them right down to the basics, rock in place, whatever you call it, where you can set a lamppost, as Thoreau said, and then travel from there. But the nature has had a lot to do with the way I've developed through the years. I can remember I forget the age, but I wasn't very old, maybe 10, 11 years old. Roughly 10, 11 years old. And I can remember going up one of the canyons by a farm that we leased and milked cows on, put up hay and different things. I got done milking a little early one night, and it was a nice spring, early summer evening, and I decided I'm just going to go up this canyon. And so I went up there on my bike, and when I got partway up there was this kind of a green hill, and there's a little stream running through it, and I noticed some movement over there, and I went over, and I remember just sitting down, kind of we call it Indian style, where you cross your legs and just sit down. And pretty soon I saw these little rabbits coming out, and a mother rabbit. And they were just, it was early evening, and they'd come out and they just, I don't know, something kind of touched my soul about the whole thing. I just sat there and watched them and wondered and tried to put myself in their mind and what their life and what their day was like. And it wasn't too long till I'd watched them, and there was a doe that came out from between a willow patch, and she had two little fawns with her, and they were when they're first born, they have little speckles on them that just make them extra cute, and they were so small. They had just been born maybe a day or two, and I was just very quiet, and I think fortunately I was downwind and they didn't smell me, but I just absorbed that whole experience, and it just spoke to me in a way that's hard for me to explain. But there's been lots of other examples like that. Well, that's the kind of thing I think we cheat ourselves of in this fast-paced, social media, news-driven, traffic-driven, crowd-driven, just chaos, I'd call it. Some people might feel comfortable outside that, but for me it was chaos. And I just loved, and have to this very day, loved the quiet peace and calm that can come from being alone in nature. And not just being alone, but getting all the stuff off our mind that you may have been thinking about all day long or all week long or whatever. It takes some training to get to that point so that you have nothing to think about, and then to see where your mind goes. See what you observe. See what it tells you. Because we'll be told some things just like that. Those turtles were that took off to the ocean, and the calves and the deer and the little moose that know exactly what to do when they're first born. And there's just something about nature that seems to click. And I figured that our lives ought to be like that. And yet, there's things happen in nature that seems a little harsh sometimes, but still it's in nature, and in that, I wouldn't say just nature, but in a nature mindset. By that I mean a solitude, a reflective, peaceful spot where we can just figure it out. And then ask ourselves, maybe we eventually buy into this transcendental philosophy where we are able to discover truth intuitively. Just something inside of us says, that's true, and I can count on it. Just like that little boy that could count on his dad holding the rope when he couldn't count on anybody else. It's not to say that the others wouldn't have done just as good a job, but in his mind, the peace wouldn't have been there because he didn't have a track record with it. He had a track record with his dad, and so the trust was there. So it's an interesting thought. And I think this whole transcendental philosophy is something that society in general needs to adopt a little more, because we're too used to having the news tell us what to think. And not only what to think, but when to think it and how to think it and what to do about what we think. And we've become like on the farm. We knew that if a sheep ever got out of the pasture, the whole herd would follow that one sheep. And if a sheep ever found its way back into the pasture through that same hole in the fence or whatever it was, the whole herd would come back in. The sheep mentality is just to get behind the one that's leading and follow it. And we're too much that way in society. We find somebody that wants to lead, and without even thinking, without owning the thought even, we follow. And maybe there's some good to that, because when you're little, it's kind of important, I guess, to follow. It's important for those little fawns to follow their mother. But it's not the end goal. And it's important to understand and realize that. Well, I just thought I'd add a little bit about that kind of philosophy, because it's been a part of me. And as we go forward with this YouTube business, I'll express some opinions, but I don't expect your opinion to be my opinion. In fact, part of some of the statements that came out of that Transcendental thing I forget I think it was Emerson on this one. He said, I will march to the beat of my own drummer, however distant or far away. And in other words, the steps that you take are going to be to the beat of your own drum, not somebody else pounding the drum and you just marching the steps in unison. And it's a good way to go. I'm convinced of that. There's been times that I can think back in my life when it's been hard to kind of break away from the crowd and do something different than everybody else is doing, or to think something different than everybody else is thinking, or to be the only one that refuses, or the only one that volunteers, or whatever. It's hard to act in solitude sometimes, because we're so used to marching with the crowd, like those sheep are on the farm. They just where one goes, we all go kind of mentality. So I've come to value people that have their own thoughts. They might not agree with my thoughts, and I value that too. I mentioned that I taught for school for a lot of years, and one of the things that I really like to see in my students was I like to see them say, I don't agree with you. I think it's this way. And then to hear them give their rationale for that and defend it. And that's good quality. Now, somebody else might say, oh, you mean those rebellious types? Well, not really. I'm not talking about rebelling for the sake of rebelling. I'm just talking about allowing somebody and giving ourselves the freedom to think differently and ponder alternatives and other possibilities, and really come to understand when we do believe something, we maybe have defended it enough times that we believe it even more. At the same time, I've always believed that if you say I believe something, and you'll hear me use that word believe, so maybe I'll violate my own rules here a little bit, but we need to always be flexible. We need to be, if we want other people to hear us out and consider our points of view, we need to do the same to somebody else. And I'm guilty of this, we spend too much time listening to speak trying to wait and then get our words in, and sometimes not even wait, and get our words in and do some teaching, and when we should really intently listen to learn, to have our mind expanded and maybe alternatives presented and different viewpoints taken. And they've done studies to show that even in big companies, those companies that allow their employees and even encourage their employees to do that are the most successful companies. So anyway, it's important to realize that. And I think the one thing that I might be guilty of as we go through this together is you might feel like I'm trying to pull or tug you in the same direction that I was pulled or tugged. And that's fairly common, I think, especially if you've found something that's good. And I don't think that's necessarily bad to want to pull somebody in the direction of that you've already been in and found enjoyable or successful. That's how successes are made oftentimes. But when it becomes bad is when there's an expectation. It's when, okay, I presented something and now I expect you to believe it. And I expect you to believe it because I believe it. And that's sometimes where we get into trouble. Well, I'm not going to continue on. I don't want to ever make these more than about 30 minutes, and I'm going to work closer to 20 as I get a little better at this. So you'll have to be patient with me. But there is value in independent thought. We should all at least consider adopting the independent transcendentalist philosophy that we all have the power and the innate ability to know truth intuitively. So give it some thought. We'll see you next time.